Good morning, Beacon. It's so wonderful to see you all this morning. My name is Missy Rogers, and I'm your worship associate today. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a white woman with shoulder-length salt and pepper hair wearing a blue floral blouse. Welcome to those here in the sanctuary and those of you online. If you are joining us online, please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. You may also consider joining us in our Slack channel. And I invite those of you who are here in Summit, New Jersey, on the lands of the Lenni Lenape, to please turn and look at your neighbors and greet each other with a smile. So I want to take just a moment, as we all have now greeted each other, to give a shout out to some folks. Those of you who were at our Spring Forward event last night, thank you so much for participating. And a very, very special thank you to Stacy Lees for all of the hard work she put into it. And to her right-hand man, Wim Sweldens, who did a lot as well. To Chad for being a wonderful MC. And honestly, just for everybody who attended, if you couldn't be there, remember, next year when you see something about Spring Forward, make sure you join. It was a wonderful evening, and it's a wonderful time to get to see all of our community together at one time to bask in each other's glory. Some of us were dressed up in ways that were very fun, and we had a great time, so thank you all so much. After the service today, there are more things that you can become involved in as you wish. There are slides in the lobby on the TV there. If you aren't in the habit of looking at those, they will scroll through various things going on. One of the things I want to call out is after the service today, there is a discussion about the UUA Article 2 proposed changes, and Article 2 is around the UUA values and some proposed changes to how those are presented. So if you're interested, today in the library, somewhere, follow Reverend Robin. She will be there, and just oh, okay, good. Well, and maybe follow Rosemary then. She seems to be in the know. All right, so we welcome you today to this group where we are all committed to radical inclusion, feeding the human spirit, and healing the world. Blessed be this day. Our chalice lighting words utilize the phrase Dayanu, which means it would be enough. It is a song and a recitation found in the Passover ritual. Can we come to this story again of fleeing for freedom while Egyptians drown and the curses quake in the hills? Can we come to this story again of first bones taken and hail coming down in the desert? Will it be enough to come to this story again? If we see now another more clearly, Dayanu. If we believe more than one story can be, Dayanu. If we cast a light that does not choose who is holy and sacred, Dayanu. If all life matters, Dayanu. If we are beloved, Dayanu. If we dare, Dayanu.
My name is Kit Stinson, and by way of describing my appearance, I will tell you a quick story. I was in the supermarket checkout line the other day, and in the line next to me, there was a woman with a very young child, probably about 3 years old, and he was staring very intently at my face, and I thought, oh, this is good. He seems to find my face pleasant. Maybe I can get him to smile, help him pass the time, and so on. But just as I was about to launch my charm offensive, he turned to his mother and said, "Mommy, am I old?" I think the moral of that story is if you really want to know what someone looks like, ask a 3-year-old. More to the point, this morning I am wearing the burgundy-colored stole that identifies me as a Beacon chaplain. Chaplains are trained volunteers who extend the spiritual care of our community through deep listening, presence, and compassion. If you'd like to know more about our chaplain program, you can contact Reverend Robin or visit our website and click on the link named Heal the World. Chaplains also lead our community candle lighting ritual. Together, we light candles of joy, sorrow, and gratitude, first as a congregation and then as individuals. Today, we light a candle of gratitude for everyone who helped Beacon arrive last Sunday at congregational consensus on our expansion plan. We are grateful to everyone who participated in the process over many, many months, regardless of where they stood on the key issues. And in that spirit, we light a candle of mutual support. While the vote ended this phase of the process, it did not end the emotions that go hand in hand with a change of this magnitude. And may our covenant guide us in the months ahead, calling us back into the commitments we have made to one another, to speak honestly and with compassion, to listen deeply, and to honor diversity in all its forms. We light a candle of celebration for everyone who is observing Passover, and also for those who may not be observing it now, but who hold memories of Passovers gone by. May this be a time of union, reunion, freedom, and community. We light a candle of sorrow on the loss of Congressman David Payne, Jr., a 6-term Democratic congressman from Newark, who died this past week at the age of 65. Congressman Payne was well known and deeply respected for his tireless work on behalf of racial justice, reproductive freedom, voting rights, and free college tuition. We light a candle of protection for everyone involved in the recent protests on college campuses. And we light a candle of hope that protests may be peaceful and lead to an end of war and injustice, that violence and prejudice be actively combated and not increase in this time of fear and despair. For all these things, and for so much more, we invite you now to come forward and light a candle here in our sanctuary or wherever you are.
the sanctuary, we can hear the birds singing along with that Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen. The next piece we're going to do together is in the Teal hymnal. It's number 1032. It's Dauna Naish in Arabic, a prayer for peace. And it means, let us live in peace. Let us live in inner peace. Let us weave our dreams together. Let us die in peace.
Our prayer today, beloved, comes in the form of a poem. It is a poem written by the Palestinian poet Heba Abu Nada, as translated by Huda Fakhrandini. Nada wrote the poem on October 10th, and just 10 days later, she was killed by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. It is entitled, I Grant You Refuge, and I invite you, as you're comfortable, you might want, as you listen to these words, to close your eyes as you take them in. We read them as a prayer, as Nada's last poem that she was able to write. I grant you refuge, an invocation and prayer. I bless the neighborhood and the minaret to guard them from the rocket from the moment it is a general's command until it becomes a raid. I grant you and the little ones refuge, the little ones who change the rocket's course before it lands with their smiles.
I grant you and the little ones refuge, the little ones now asleep like chicks in a nest. They don't walk in their sleep toward dreams. They know death lurks outside the house. Their mother's tears are now doves following them, trailing behind every coffin.
I grant the father refuge, the little one's father who holds the house upright when it tilts after the bombs. He implores the moment of death, have mercy. Spare me a little while. For their sake, I've learned to love my life. Grant them a death as beautiful as they are.
I grant you refuge from hurt and death, refuge in the glory of our siege here in the belly of the whale. Our streets exalt God with every bomb. They pray for the mosques and the houses. And every time the bombing begins in the north, our supplications rise in the south.
I grant you refuge from hurt and suffering. With words of sacred scripture, I shield the oranges from the sting of phosphorus and the shades of cloud from the smog. I grant you refuge in knowing that the dust will clear, and they who fell in love and died together will one day laugh. Take with me, beloved, some breaths. Take in once more the words of the poet. So may she rest in strength. So may her memory, even in the tragedy, be a blessing. Beloved, we have the gift of a leader for environmental justice in our midst this day. Melissa Miles, Executive Director for the New Jersey Alliance for Environmental Justice, has personally inspired me, and I know many of you over the years, leading an organization that goes to the core of so many Unitarian Universalist values. And I'm very grateful for this final Sunday of 3, for which we take up our plate collection for the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, that Melissa is here with us to speak of the important work of her organization and the call for environmental justice right here in New Jersey. Melissa?
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Missy. Thank you all for being here today. As Robin said, I'm Melissa. I'm the ED of New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. Really happy to be with you all here today. This is, I guess, my second time in this space. I was here last year doing pretty much the same thing. And I remember being a little weepy last year too. There's something about being in this space that seems to pull emotion from me. And some of you are like, yeah, and I'm over there by that window too. For those of you, I'll describe myself a little bit. 40-something-year-old Black woman who sits near windows now. Many of you understand why. You know, I get a little bit more emotional than maybe I used to. Things, you know, just hit in a different way. So yeah, that has been my experience with this congregation, with its members. It really brings something out of me. So I'll talk a little bit more about myself. So I'm a resident of Summit, have been for going on 4 years. We moved here, my 2 sons and I, during the pandemic. One of them goes to Brayton. The other one graduated from Brayton. He's at the middle school now. They're doing really well. We moved from Newark, where we probably still would be if it hadn't been for the pandemic. So, you know, one of the bright sides for us was that it just catalyzed a move for us because, as many of you know, Newark is very densely populated. It's the most densely populated city in the state, which makes, you know, the environmental degradation there such a tragedy because so many people live there. You know, the most populated ward of the most populated city is where you have so much of the industry that runs the region. The good news is that change is possible. Technology, hearts, minds, finance, all seem to be starting to align so that we can change those trends. Another piece of really good news is that because of strong advocacy, now that the moment seems to have arrived when, you know, political will, finance have aligned, there are people who have been holding solutions, you know, for years now. So we are pretty ready. I won't say completely ready, only because there's just so much work to do in communities throughout the state. So for example, in 2020, my organization, including our wonderful boards are amazing. So thank you so much for those of you here that are on the Beacon board. Our board and staff helped to get the environmental justice law passed. It was the first of its kind in the nation, still the strongest of its kind. New York passed one about a year back. So for once, New York is following New Jersey, following our footsteps, exactly. Something to be proud of. We were an example of how you hold a vision of, environmental justice over decades, so that when the political moment arrives, there are folks that are ready to, pick up the baton and run with that work. And also continue moving with it through what's called the regulation phase, right? Because you get a law passed, but in order for that law to be effectively administered, you need rules. And that's sometimes where things happen, where loopholes arise that make it so that laws that are on the books and are supposed to protect people actually don't. So we had a hand in creating the rules for the state, and they're pretty tough. Now the state's trying to roll this out, and it's not easy. So we still have work to do when it comes to educating communities on how to use the law to protect themselves from polluting industries. Generally, environmental justice communities do not want to see these industries go anywhere else, right? So they're not NIMBY communities generally. They are, we need better technologies. We need stronger enforcements. We need technologies that don't poison us while they, help. So, and so that's really where we are now, is designing programs that can be replicated throughout the state, where anyone can learn about the law and how to utilize it in their community. So that's one of the big things that we're working on, that your generous donations go to, for our work. And then, just back to my kids a bit, because, who doesn't like to talk about their own children? And they belong to the community, so, anyone that'd like to hang out with them, you are welcome. Takes a village, it really does. Being here and being in Summit, I realized just how I have so much gratitude, right? Because we were in a place where their health was constantly threatened. The things that we inhaled in Newark still live in our bodies. Air pollution does travel, but the people who live closest to the source tend to get it the worst. So, we still deal with the occasional bouts of asthma. And just last week, my son was on his nebulizer for a couple of days, which tends to happen as the seasons change. But we know it's nothing like what we dealt with in Newark, where, 1 year old, it was like, the threat and the shock of realizing your child has asthma, which unfortunately in EJ community still is deadly. What we may think of as a curable or, a preventable disease, still happening in EJ communities around the state. So, we have to keep up the fight, with positivity, with hope. And, I don't like to speak for too long, but I'll end with some of my observations from the environmental and climate justice movement, because I am fortunate enough to have lots of interaction with communities around the country. So even though we're a statewide organization and we work in communities throughout the state, in Newark and Camden and Trenton and Linden and Rahway and Jersey City and Orange, we also sit on many national coalitions. And by we, I mean New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. Please look at our website. It's just njeja.org. If you're a visual person, want to see some pictures, some videos, hear some music, that's the place to go. We also have Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, because I have a young staff, thank God. And we're NJEJ Alliance on other socials, so please check us out. And yes, we sit on many national coalitions where we get to talk with other communities and other organizations who are doing similar work, blazing trails where they live, changing legislation, changing practice, front-facing industry, helping to move the needle, helping to get dollars from the federal government down to communities to make those changes. And what I've seen is that there are different sort of archetypes of people in this work, right? So there are our artists, folks who bring the music and, help us make the banners and the posters for marches. Marches are very dull without music and posters, I'll tell you that. So we need those things. And also just to liven our spirits and brighten our day. We have our intellects, and our people who just may read permits. Some of those permits are 40 or 50 pages long. Some of these things are hundreds of pages long. So we have folks who just pick that stuff apart and sort of translate it for the rest of us. We work with lawyers, we work with scientists, people who can tell us about what's happening to your body when you inhale certain types of pollution. And then there's sort of a warrior class, which I attribute myself to, which there are those who just live, eat, sleep, breathe the work. We wake up working, we go to bed working. Some of my colleagues really consider themselves on the front lines. I've heard this is where I will die, right? Like people who are willing to give their lives for this. I'm almost there. I'm there now, but I'm like, I don't know if I want to stay here. I think there may be another role for me. And then there's like our chaplain class, right? There are those people who are there to sort of orient us to the true nature of the work, why we really do it. And so being here, for me, the discomfort of being pulled out of my warrior self into the spiritual, but it's actually necessary, right? Because that is what really will keep us going in these struggles through decades, through ages, and able to pass them on to the next generation. So for that, I will thank you again for your time, for your generosity, and for your work, the actual work you all do, to change society in a variety of ways. I want to thank you again.
Our morning offering will now be most gratefully received, beloved.
This song was written by Noam Katz. It's called Ve'ahavta, which is an important prayer. And in Hebrew, the translation of Ve'ahavta would be, you shall love the eternal God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Find yourself, give yourself to love. what's wrong and make it
Our reading is from Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt. All four are one. Today, the four children are a Zionist, a Palestinian solidarity activist, a peacenik, and one who doesn't know what to even dream. The Zionist, what does she say? 10,000 years we dreamed of return. Next year in Jerusalem is now, and hope is the beacon we steer by. The solidarity activist, what do they say? We know the heart of the stranger. To be oppressors is unbearable. Uplift the downtrodden. The peacenik, what does he say? We both love this land and neither is leaving. We're in this together. Between the river and the sea, two peoples must be free. And the one who doesn't know what even to dream? Feed the one sweet haroset, a reminder that building a just future has always been our call. All of us are wise. None of us is wicked. Even the Yetzer Hara is holy. Without it, no art would be made, no future imagined. We are one people, one family, not only because history's flames never asked what kind of Jew one might be, but because the dream of collective liberation is our legacy. We need each other in this wilderness. Only together can we build redemption.
It is Passover, beloved. It is a time of ritual, of reconnecting, of cherished recipes, returning. I wonder how many here have participated in or maybe even led a Seder at some point in your life? Yeah? We've got an experienced crowd. We'll make this a little more interactive then. I will share that it wasn't until I was in college that I got to go to my first Seder. I had joined a sorority, and that is not going to be explained in the sermon today. That's for another day. But many of the sisters in my chapter were Jewish, and one of them invited me to go home with her for Passover and to go to her family's Seder. It was that night I also discovered my love for gefilte fish. I'm told this is not a universal love. It was a beautiful evening, filled with stories and rituals led by a family Haggadah, the text telling the tale and significance and teaching and the meaning of the meal that we were sharing, the Passover story, the story of Exodus. Now, if you aren't from a background in the Abrahamic phase, you may or may not know the tale, or perhaps your understanding of the story is from the media projections, which are intermittently honest, let us say. The story begins with a figure of great importance. Moses. Very good. So far, the quiz is going well. Moses is a man of many stories, right? He is born from an enslaved Hebrew woman who, in order to save his life, puts him in a... This is fun, because it could become like choose your own adventure, which would not what we're going for. So he gets placed in a basket and put in a river in the hopes of saving his life, because in the text we are told that the Pharaoh would occasionally take the lives of all the young male children as a way of trying to control the enslaved Hebrew people. And so this mother, fearing for the life of her child, placed Moses in a basket and sent him down the river. And in the story, we are told, not only was he saved, but he was saved by none other than the daughter of the Pharaoh, who takes him out of the water, names him Moses, and raises him in Pharaoh's house. Now, as Moses grows in age and wisdom, he begins to have questions about how this society is governed. He begins to have questions about slavery and justice and what is right and good. It is one day while he is watching an Egyptian beat a slave that his conscience stirs even more, and he cannot take it, and he defends that enslaved person and kills the Egyptian. It causes Moses to flee for fear of his life. While he is in exile, his own exile, it is there that he encounters a bush that is not consumed by the flame. He notices it, and realizing he is in a sacred moment and on sacred ground, he removes his sandals. And I'm shortening the story here a little because it's like a lot of chapters, okay? But long story short, God is manifest in that moment to Moses and says, hey, Moses, you are going to free your people. You're going to free the Israelites. And you're going to do so with some friends, Aaron and Miriam, who we could tell many other stories about as well, but we're skipping some parts here, okay? Essentially, it becomes like a community organizing campaign, all right? And Moses goes back and petitions Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, no, right? Okay, so we're still with the same story. That's good. And that is when God says, I am going to issue the first plague. Plague after plague follows. The first one is that the waters turn to blood. Then frogs take over, followed by lice, flies, pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, and darkness. Every time in the midst of the plague that has appeared, Pharaoh agrees to let the people go. Yes. But once the plague is lifted, he changes his mind. And so the plagues continue until the last one. Now, we are told in the text that after the first 5 plagues, God hardens Pharaoh's heart. Hold on to that. That becomes an important detail. The final plague is when God instructs Moses and all of the Hebrews to find some animals who are in their first year of life, to kill them, to take their blood and mark the doors over the threshold. I don't know if that's the right architectural term. Chris, what's the thing above the door? The mantle. Sure. Lentil? Like a soup. Lentil. I'm learning something new in this Choose Your Own Adventure. So, mark it with blood, and that the shadow of death would pass over those households with the mark. For the other households, the firstborn would be killed. So the Israelites do this, and they wait in the huddled darkness as the firstborn in every other household is murdered. In some of the texts, we are told that a wailing arises among the Egyptians. And as they wake to this nightmare, Pharaoh relents, and the Israelites are permitted to flee Egypt, but they are told they must go quickly, so quickly that they take their dough without being able to add any leavening to it. And that is why on Passover at the Seder, only unleavened food items, only unleavened bread, like matzah, are permitted. As they flee, they come to the sea, and it is then that they realize that the Egyptians are pursuing them in chariots, right? And this is the moment where Moses, what does Moses do? Parts the sea with his staff. Good job. The waters part, the Israelites cross, and the Egyptians pursue them. The Israelites get to safety on the other side, and just as they get to safety, the Israelites, their chariots get stuck in the sand, and it's then that the water collapses on them and they drown. The Israelites will spend 40 years wandering in the desert until they make it to that promised land. So how do we, as Unitarian Universalists, make sense of this story? How do we, in the present political context, make sense of this story? With the Israel-Hamas war, with tens of thousands of Palestinians now dead, and many, many more starving in a famine, with hostages still held captive, with both Judaism and Islam woven into our Unitarian Universalist communities, and our very symbol of the chalice taken from our work in World War II of securing safe passage for Jews and others from the Nazis. This symbol was a symbol of safety. It was a promise of refuge, that we would always make the sacrifice to answer love's call. What do we do with our questions in this story of Pharaoh's heart being hardened, of an angry God who drowns Egyptians and takes the firstborn, who seems to also be jealous at times in the text? What do we make of our questions of honoring the Passover and Seder even here tonight at 6 o'clock in our sanctuary? What do we make of this moment in time? Maybe we should just keep our questions to ourselves. It's not really the way of Unitarian Universalists. We are not a people who tend to keep our questions, or thankfully even our disagreements, our struggles, to ourselves. I joked yesterday at Reverend Dr. Willie Francois' installation at Fountain Baptist Church as the new pastor of Fountain Baptist Church. I joked that among Unitarian Universalists, if you have two of us in a room, you have at least 3 opinions. And there is a tradition, right, within Judaism as well, of not only debate, but of preserving the debate in the text, right? In the Midrash. The minority opinion, even if it does not win out, is kept forever in the record. And we have a history here in this very congregation of cherished debate, of honoring the right of conscience and staying in the disagreement. One of our earliest ministers, Reverend Doan, for example, when this congregation was just a little over a decade old, right? Brand new. There was a lot at stake, right? We were kind of those Unitarians. Who are they? And in the midst of this context, Reverend Doan really discerned with his conscience at the edge of World War I that he was a pacifist, that he could not support the U.S. entering the war. This was not a popular opinion, friends. And it wasn't a popular opinion in the congregation. Most of the members of this congregation patently disagreed with Reverend Doan. And it brought great controversy, right? It went out into the community and people started talking. Do you know that Unitarian minister? He's a pacifist. Is he really a patriot? We don't know. Is he a spy? So the FBI was sent to investigate him. And that is when Reverend Doan, not wanting to cause a great controversy, not wanting the entirety of this new endeavor to start a Unitarian community here in Summit to just fold in on itself just a little over a decade, said, I've got to resign. So he went to the board and submitted his letter of resignation. He apologized for the controversy he created, but said, look, I cannot do anything but abide by my conscience, but I won't bring this controversy on you. And the board looked at the letter and said, thank you, but no. And not only did they not accept Reverend Doan's resignation, but what's more, they issued a public letter to the city of Summit and published it in the newspaper. That letter is out in our foyer. You can read it. And they said, well, most of us don't agree with Reverend Doan. Don't get it twisted. We nonetheless defend his right to hold this position. So we have a cherished tradition of raising the questions and of listening to divergent answers to the most pressing moral issues of our time. So let's turn to the text for a moment. I'll just say as a note, last week at our congregational meeting, there was a little bylaw review on the threshold it takes to dismiss a minister. Just want to say it's high. It's a high threshold. Just for clarity, in case anybody's checking your bylaws before I go. So if we look to this story, we discover that there are layers here. First of all, Moses was a very unlikely leader, right? He, we are told, had some kind of stutter or something that made public speaking very difficult. He did not like to be in the spotlight. He was not a bombastic, let's go kind of dude. He was much more comfortable in the background. Second of all, we know that a generation would have to pass before those who escaped Egypt were able to get to the promised land. 40 years, and it's like, if you look at it on a map, it wasn't a problem of not having GPS, okay? It's a metaphor. A metaphor about unlearning bondage, oppression, and of really understanding liberation. It is a complex story where God seemingly proves himself through a series of bizarre challenges, and then ultimately by murdering the firstborns. But then, too, the text tells us that God told the Israelites to stop cheering and rejoicing when the Egyptians were drowning. And the text, as I said, preserves the debates, even the ones that did not win out. We see the minority opinion preserved forever, which was this: was it always to be retributive justice, back and forth? Plague, destruction, plague, destruction, plague, destruction. Or as Jonathan Sacks writes, as we sit around the Seder table, rehearsing the journey from the bread of oppression to the wine of freedom, we commit ourselves to a momentous proposition, that history has meaning. That history has meaning. We are not condemned to eternally repeat the tragedies of the past. Not everywhere is in Egypt. Not all politics are the exploitation of the many by the few. Life is potentially something other and more gracious than the pursuit of power. Though we have not yet constructed the perfect social order, and though the Messianic age with its reign of peace remains over the horizon, we are not wrong to travel in that direction, however long it may take before we reach our destination. I like the way that he puts it, which is the essence of the question in the minority opinion of the text. Are we condemned to eternally repeat the tragedies of the past, to play out this archetypal story again and again? Not only do I not believe that, beloved, and I don't think many of you do, but I also don't think that everyone who came before, who contributed to the creation of this story, was some kind of naive idiot. I think that they knew the struggles of humanity. In fact, I think many of them had lived through visceral oppression, through war, and I think they created in the text a jealous, insecure, angry God, one they probably saw at the dinner table. One that they probably saw in the leaders of the day. You see, we tell stories and versions of God not only because some of us believe in that particular form of God, but also because some of us have lived under that kind of oppressive rule. And we tell these stories not to extol that kind of holy, but perhaps to be like a beacon, a warning, so that we will see the stories coming and not repeat them. It feels like everyone in my circle, and even in my own brain, have tried to do this in regard to Israel and Palestine, to try to keep conforming the story to a simplification: bad, good, enslaved, oppressor. But those narrow definitions don't work in our world today. And I think that we have gotten so twisted in our inability to understand the complexity of this moment that we have forgotten the plainest moral truths. And we have been silenced when we needed to speak. And I include myself in the critique. There is a story that some of you undoubtedly have heard of a rabbi who was delivering a sermon at the Bema, and this rabbi had a young child, a little son who was about a year old, who was fussing in the congregation and twisting and turning and shouting, and finally, I think the rabbi's spouse kind of gave up and was like, okay, I give, and the little child made his way to the Bema. Now, the rabbi's trying to finish this perfectly crafted sermon, and I really feel the rabbi's pain, okay? I know that's not the point of the story. But at any rate, the child comes up, and so the rabbi, realizing he's got to do something, picks the child up and then tries to go back to the sermon, right? Well, the child is having none of it. The child starts babbling and talking loudly, and the rabbi tries to talk louder and go over the child. Then the child grabs at the rabbi's tie, and the rabbi's trying to pull the tie back and settle it into his shirt, and he goes back to the sermon, and he's trying to find where he is, and that's when the little child grabs the rabbi's glasses off of his face and throws them to the ground. And finally, the rabbi gets it. The sermon is not on the page that day. The sermon is in his arms. And so the rabbi looks at his congregation and he says, "Tell me, when do we cease to be a child of God, deserving of mercy, deserving of compassion, deserving of love? Is it when we are a toddler and we're challenging? Is it when we are in middle school and we begin to disagree with the powers that be? Is it when we are a teenager or in young adulthood? Is it middle-aged? Or do we cease to be a child of God as we age and we become elders in our community? When do we cease to be deserving of mercy, of compassion, of love?" The answer to the present moral dilemma, to the questions before us, is actually very clear in Unitarian Universalism, and it's very clear in Judaism, in Islam, and in nearly every religious tradition. We don't need to get lost in the wilderness on this one. Every human life has value. Every human life matters. I think I have gotten lost at times in this because of the anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic hatred that is rising in this country. 3 of my kids have Jewish ancestry, and 2 of them have been bullied at school for it in the last 6 months. Yes, the terrorist attacks by Hamas were horrendous. And we cannot make animals of anyone. The language that we use to describe any human being, no matter what they have done, matters. And the worst of atrocities does not merit this endless cycle of violence, this disproportionate devastation and decimation of a people. And please, this day, I don't want to argue about the technical terminology of the word genocide, but instead I want to stay in the moral clarity that every human life matters. every human life. Now, don't let anti-Semitism get us twisted. There are Jewish UUs and many Jews around the country and world who are not in support of this war or Netanyahu. Imagine making that claim that all Americans claim Trump. Like, think about it for a minute. And there are tens of thousands of Israelis protesting every day in Israel, at great personal peril, might I add, under a far-right bully. Our prejudice can make us see one another as monoliths. But our path forward, beloved, if there is to be one in humanity, means getting close enough to see that every single life matters, that everyone was once a child. I think the story is a warning of conjuring a jealous, angry God who matches the limitations of our own mercy. And it is the story that in the midst of this, another voice, albeit the minority opinion, still survives. Are these Egyptians drowning in the sea not my children? Is the wailing of the heart at dawn for the death not the collective hearts of us all? Is the wandering in the desert and missing the beloveds who never saw the promised land, who were captured and held captive and still aren't free, not the capture of any of our beloveds? As we say in the Seder, Dayenu, if we could at last learn this weary lesson that every human is worthy, Dayenu, it would be enough. I think Rabbi Berenblatt has it right when she explains this. It's traditional to end the Seder with next year in Jerusalem, right? It's common in the text. She says, the call speaks to the feeling of exile which characterized the Jewish diaspora for centuries. But for us today in this place, what is that call? The root meaning of the word shows the cry has two senses. The word's root can be read as Ir Shalem, city of wholeness, or Ir Shalom, city of peace. Even if we don't perceive ourselves as being in exile from the literal land of Israel, we are still in exile from wholeness, from unity, from peace. Next year, wherever we are, she says, may we be whole, may we be one, may we be at peace. I think that takes the courage to speak, even if you stutter like Moses. The courage to call on your country, our country, to stop sending bombs all over this world. Dayenu, it would be enough if we could get the prophetic moral clarity to pray that violence passes over every house, every home. Dayenu, it would be enough if we could have the spiritual discipline to see that the bush is not consumed in flame and that holy ground is here and now. That earth is sacred. Dayenu, it would be enough to strive for a collective liberation that moves past the greatest desert of the human heart and our despair and grants refuge to all life. Dayenu, in the words of Judy Chicago, and then all human beings will be gentle. And then all human beings will be strong. And then all will be so varied, rich, and free, and everywhere will be called Eden once again. Dayenu.
Our closing song is Where You Go, I Will Go by Shoshana Jedwab. Thanks, John. This afternoon, we do have an afternoon music concert where my predecessor, Mitchell Vines, who was here for 19 years, will be playing a recital. That's at 2 o'clock. We hope that you will come. And if you would rise in all ways possible, and we will end by singing Where You Go. Where you go, I will go, and
Beloved, would you take hands with one another? Maybe Helen can help me hold too. Thank you, Helen. Beloved, may the love that is our source and ultimate return, the love that kindles the flame of this chalice, the love that lives within each of you, may it guide you. Guide you to speak, guide you to lead, guide you to follow the conscience that says every human life is sacred. So may our lives be a testimony to that love. So may our answer to that great question always be yes. Yes. Amen.
Amen.